Let's detail out this back wall. Go ahead and subdivide a few times. I want to check the detail that I'm getting here. Something else I'm going to do here is remove some of this geometry to lighten it up a bit. So I'm holding Control and Shift at the same time to make the selection. And clicking the open space will bring back the whole object. I'm just going to select the top half here. And now everything that's hidden I want to delete. So I'll come over here to go up here to Geometry. Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. Click that, that'll delete everything that's not visible. So that's lightened up our back wall a bit. I'll be decimating out all these meshes later, which will also help lighten them further. Now I'm using the clay brush to start laying in the forms and create the crystalline rocks just like we did with the small pieces. I'm doing the same thing, building up the large forms first. All these rocks, I kind of want a V pointing toward the opening in the back. It's a centerpiece to the whole cave, so I'm reinforcing that by creating these lines that extend the shape of the opening. Here, back to the spray tool, start roughing up these areas, break up the geo. This opening is also going to be letting in light into the cave. So I'll be adding detail around the opening since that'll be affecting the light in the final shot. I want to break up this opening and add some randomness to it so it isn't quite so V-shaped. Here I'm just changing the lazy mouse settings. I was getting a few too many lines in my brush. Again, the lazy mouse will help to smooth out your brush strokes. Let me set this back. I usually end up smoothing things again after, again holding Shift and smoothing out brush strokes. This is a kind of a blocking pass, so I don't mind any artifacts or brush strokes. The V-shape that I have here in the cave came right from the concept art initially. Because the people we created for White Storm, I talked about this a little bit before. They had this very geometric look that we wanted to show in their surroundings. One of the big shapes is this V or triangle. It shows up again in the cave as this opening. It kind of helps to give the idea that this place was very important to the people. So that was just reinforced here in the background of the shot. Yeah, I'm just blocking in large shapes of the rocks. Continuing the definition of the opening here. letting that drive all of my rocks that have kind of eroded in these triangular layers. The clay brush is great for just blocking in any types of shapes, whether it's organic or inorganic. It's just a great way to build up forms and mass. Now I'm switching over to the planar tool. Now that I have these masses built up, I can chip them away, smooth them out, get a very rocky feel. Kind of build up where I left off with the clay tool. And I'm also always keeping this alpha channel that's square. This is one of the presets in Zbrush. I find it was really nice for creating these specific rocks, and that it gives you a nice fall off to the brush that you wouldn't get without an alpha channel or with one of the circular alpha channels. It gave these rocks a very unique look that I liked. So I'm going to continue using that on all my brushes, the square alpha channel. I recommend trying out different alpha channels if this is your first time with Zbrush. Find something you like, or again, like we did earlier, it's easy to make your own alpha channels. If you want to try out custom-made ones, you can make them in Photoshop or right out of Max with geometry like we did before. Making custom brushes will really help you find those one or two things that really make a project unique. And you'll find you'll end up using some of the better ones all the time. I'm just continuing the planar brush to carve out this detail. It's very similar to chiseling away. It has these nice hard edges that I really like when creating these rocks. It's good too when working on a project like this to have some reference material open on the side. Some concept art, if you're provided concept art. And follow that. You can get some unique ideas from looking at the reference photography, different rock formations or whatever it is you're sculpting, and kind of pull them into your own work. I need to clean out the opening here. Sometimes when working with the planar brush, you'll get these pulls and artifacts, these little pop-ups. When two pieces of geometry that are very close to each other, so you need to keep an eye out for that. And take a look at the overall shape here. See where I need a detail. I'll go back to the clay brush here to add some detail in these small areas that need it. I tend to go over my stuff multiple times. Kind of break up the forms, then smoothing them back, and refining them again, and then breaking them up again. Kind of build up these layers of detail on top of each other. The spray on the clay tool really helped to add some randomness. Make things look less planned and sculpted and more organic. Give it a more naturally eroded look. Here on the sides, I need some more detail. Again, I'm hitting the spacebar to bring up the pop-up for selecting brushes. Blocking some detail on the edges here, and then continue to refine them. with the planar tool. Some of these forms on the side may not be visible in the final shot, so I'm just leaving them a bit rough as large masses, since they may provide some bounce lighting information to the scene. But since they won't be visible, I'm not worried about them having a lot of detail. I want something there, but I don't need to spend a lot of time on the sides. With the planar tool, depending on your initial selection, determines how the brushing with the tool, how its height and angle of the brush stroke. So vary where your initial selection is. I'm trying to select unique angles here to begin, so as I draw out the planar form, I get these unique cuts in the geometry. Okay, I think I got a good part of that well done. Back to the subtools. Gonna find some other rock formations I haven't detailed out yet, and get some detail into them. Again, I'm turning off the smooth subdivide. That way I divide without losing the shape of this. I want to keep these rectangular shapes to the rocks. Yeah, I'm changing the brush to a very large brush for the spray clay brush. Again, just to initially break up these forms so I'm not dealing with plain flat cubes. I'll start to get some ideas of where I might start chipping away at the rocks. It kind of removes that blank canvas you start with, and it gives you a nice initial starting point by randomly breaking up the form. And I'm just holding Alt to do a negative brush as opposed to a positive to get these chips here and push the geometry. And then back to the planar to smooth them out. Make them look more like rocks that have been chipped away and broken over the years. You have to be careful with the planar tool where your initial selection is. Sometimes you'll really gouge out too much or more than you wanted, and you'll find a loss of detail unless you decide to subdivide again. So I'm trying to be careful, not gouge out too much, still retain the shape of the rocks. Smooth out some of these corners. I'm holding Shift to smooth them and then going back over at the planar tool to flatten it down. You'll find it's really easy to overwork an area. So I tend to jump around all over the place and not necessarily focus on any one section. And slowly detail out the rocks overall as opposed to doing them section by section. This way I don't get stuck on any one part. I quickly build up form over the whole surface, see what's working and what's not. I'm also less worried about the back of these rocks. There's a specific direction that they are facing camera. I'm also aware of that when I'm hiding and unhiding the rest of the scene. So, since I know which way the rocks will be facing camera, I'm focusing more on those sides, the ones that are facing camera, and not the sides that are facing away. So some of the sides I'm not even touching. Now if this was a piece that was going to be duplicated around the scene, I would probably go in and fill out the backs just so I can move and reposition them and not have to worry about having a side that's not detailed. but I was pretty happy with the layout I had. And I have all my rocks laid out, so it's not going to be a problem. Now I'm just moving back and looking at the whole rock to check my work. I'll go back and unhide the rest of the cave here, so I can see it from the camera view, kind of near the ground. And just the sides that are facing camera. Now let's continue here to the right side. Again, clicking on the eye when the layer is selected will hide everything except for the layer that's currently active. So I can focus on each piece. And I need a smooth. I'm going up to 6 divisions on most of these. You can work on multiple models at the same time. If you have rocks that are overlapping, you can sculpt them together at the same time. In this case, since I have each set of rocks is kind of separated, I'm not too worried about the overlaps since they are all spread apart. So instead of having multiple rocks turned on, I can just switch between them individually. Starting again with the clay buildup tool, I'll chop out some of these areas. This will give me some different heights to work with when I switch to the planar tool. So when I come back with the planar, I got something to work with. I'm trying not to have sections end in the same place. I'm trying to vary the cuts as much as I can by having some of the chipped away pieces taller or others shorter. I'm trying not to make it look like I used the same brush on all the rocks. You can see here, depending on your selection with the planar, you can get very large chunks removed. You might find sometimes here the geo will get bunched up and stretched as you work. You'll need to go over it with the smooth tool to fix it. And here I'm just smoothing the edge a lot and going in. So I'm going in with the planar brush afterward. After you smooth, you use the initial planar selection to grab that smooth edge and carve it off so that you get this nice bevel. Gonna zoom out a bit and look over this piece. Just check how it's looking. Fill in a couple more details here before I move on. Okay, let's check this really quick, see how it's looking with the rest of the cave. This piece is a bit closer to camera, so I'm thinking I want to put in a little more detail than some of the other pieces. I noticed the tops could use some breaking up of their edges. Let's make these a little less square on top. I want to make sure the detail is holding up. So I'll add some more chips here to the tops. Again, just smoothing and then using the planar brush here to chop off these corners. We can really change the shape by doing this this method. You start further away from the ends and working your way up. You can really chop off a huge chunk of this rock. Now later on we'll be adding some additional rocks to the ground. That's where some of these pieces that have broken off might have landed and scattered around the floor. So let's check this again with the rest of the scene. Zoom out here. It's looking a lot better now. Okay, this back piece, I'll be focusing mostly on the top of this rock and keeping the detail relatively low since it's not in the shot very much. Let's go ahead and subdivide it. I'm working the same way on each of these pieces. When I started these rocks, this was just a process that I developed that I found worked. It gave me a look that fitted in with the concept. So I'm just breaking up the ends a bit more on this one using a smaller brush. And now I'm looking for those shapes I find most interesting and refining them. I'm getting some more bevels on the corners to help pick up some of the backlighting that will be here later. And here I'm holding Alt to change the brush from carving to adding to pull out some of these pieces. That's how I'm adding with this brush. And smooth out some of the stretching on the side. Sometimes there are these some problems where you get these bad strokes depending on the size of the brush. It'll start pulling from the polygons across from where you're working. And you just need to scale down the size of your brush to keep that from happening. Control Z will undo your strokes so you can go back over them. Let's pull back and get a better view of this piece. Give it a once over and check it with the scene. So it's just a background piece. We're only seeing the top, and I'm not putting nearly as much detail into it. So let's continue over on the right side, this middle rock section. When I was working on this cave for White Storm, the concept of it actually changed partway through. Initially, the cave was much more of a kind of naturally occurring cave that was untouched. It was just it's kind of found in providing a place of refuge for the people. And later on, it became a little more important than that. So we wanted it to almost look like there was some people that had come in, and they had kind of renovated, for lack of a better word, and adjusted the cave to fit their needs. So some of these structures that may have been knocked away or removed and changed, in order to change this cave into a more important and lived-in place. So the setting became more like a building and less like a landscape. Something that was a little more man-made than it was before. and this ended up affecting the way I went about sculpting it. Kind of had that in the back of my mind. And I'm just finding interesting shapes here and there that I'm refining. Trying to exaggerate them with the brushes. And really pull out those shapes that I like. That's one of the nice things with adding this initial bit of randomness with the clay buildup tool. Since you're starting with the random kind of spray of brushes, you'll find different unique things each time you start one of these. So no two rocks will end up looking the same just by doing that initial breakup of the geometry. You also already start seeing where those cavities or these formations will start appearing. And then you can just refine them, continue forming them into more prominent features. In the worst case, if there's ever a rock that's just really not working at all, you can always discard it and start over. The initial breakup you do will give you new ideas if you start again. Here I just want to add some detail to the top of these rocks. So I'm carving out with the clay buildup by holding Alt. Get some initial little kind of divots and dents. And then using the planar tool on them by selecting in the center of the dent, it'll give me a nice selection that I can start with and then spread out and break up the outline at the top of these. So they end up looking a lot less boxy. Break up the silhouette a little bit. So let's check this piece a bit. See it in the scene. It looks like I can see a bit more at the bottom of this than I thought. The end of this rock is a little bit visible. So here, if the planar tool doesn't flatten all the way, just smooth the area and go back over it a few times. Until it flattens the way you need it. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Okay, let's get this one funnel rock in the back. This is going to be another background rock, so we're just seeing the top of it. So I'll just be focusing on the very end here. To keep the forms large since it's further away from camera. I'm able to worry less about these pieces with them being further away. At this point, when I was working on the shot, the camera was locked in the initial scene. The live footage with the actors was already shot, so I knew the camera motion wouldn't be changing at all. And that we were only going to see this location from this very specific angle. So on other shots, or depending on the project, you may be seeing a location from multiple angles, in which case I would be treating the whole area with the same amount of detail. I wouldn't be leaving less detail on certain areas, because I wouldn't know for sure what would be visible and what isn't. So you don't want to neglect an area and then have it show up on camera and not have the detail to hold up. But like I said, in this case, I already know the camera was locked. So I could take little shortcuts like not having to detail things off screen or things not facing camera and know how far away objects would be. It just saves a little time not having to do that extra detailing. So for these rocks in the back, I can keep it simple. Check this a little bit. You can see once I turn the other layers back on here, kind of take a look from where the camera will be. Make sure the detail is far enough down. I'm gonna go ahead and call this done so I can move on to the other sections, texturing and lighting. Feel free to continue refining your rocks further. I'll save out this version. One of the reasons I'm saving this too is that I'm going to start decimating the mesh. You want to make sure to save a version before the decimation because you don't ever want to go back and trying to edit a decimated mesh. You'll find you'll have far too many problems. So I always save a separate version before and then after the decimation. Here I'm just looking, there's some of these large rocks are mostly below the ground. A lot of geometry we can get rid of. So here, I don't want to do this. It's going to remove all my subdivision history when I delete the mesh. So yeah, it's killing all the details I made. So when you delete, it's going to remove the subdivision and you'll lose that work. So instead I'm going to do my decimation, which is going to remove my subdivisions anyway, and then delete anything I need afterward. So you want to hit the brush icon in the subtools here and make sure all the meshes are highlighted and everything's selected. Yeah, save this really quick. And now go to the Z plugin Decimation Master. And I'm going to set this to 50% of its initial poly count. And then let's do a pre-process. Oh, I need to make sure the UV button is selected. So let's reopen the file. Let's clear that out. Go to load. And drag out the tool. And hit T to go into edit mode. So now I'll go back and make sure that freeze borders and keep UVs. And set it to 50%. And now do a pre-process all. This is going to take a little while, so I'll come back and we'll do a decimate all. And we'll have our decimate. Okay, now that it's done calculating, do decimate all. And then I'll actually do the decimation. So in a second we'll have our decimated geo. Okay, so you'll see here the total point number has gone down by half. And now we can remove any of these polygons below the ground. So again, I'm going to do a Control-Shift, drag out a rectangle. Let me switch to the wall layer. I won't be able to delete some of this because of the decimation. But I'll get rid of a little anyway, just to save a bit later on. Save some render time. So go back to the geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. I'm going to do this to a couple of the rock formations. Some of the ones that are sticking mostly below the ground. The foreground ones I don't have to worry so much about. But these background ones, the majority of the geo is below the ground. So I'll cut a bit of that off. Again, because I know where the camera is and where the rocks will be, I can remove this bit of geo and I'll know it won't be a problem. So I'll cut that guy off. I'll do a tiny bit on these mid-ground rocks too. Sometimes the geometry here will disappear during an autosave. You just have to move around and it'll reappear. Let's get this last piece here on the left. There we go. And that should be it. I just want to turn everything on here and check that I didn't remove too much. It's making it visible above the ground. I might remove a bit of the edges of this back wall. But yeah, you can see here because of the decimation, the polygons around the edge are really big and it's going to cut into shot. I wouldn't be saving much anyway. So now I'm going to save this as a new file to keep it separated and call it decimated. Just so that I know that this is the decimated version. And if I ever want to go and change anything, I'll go back to the undecimated version. And I'm gonna go ahead and delete my character here, since I don't want to be re-exporting it. So I'll just go to the subtool, make sure it's selected, go down here, and hit delete. Just hit OK, and it'll remove the mesh from the scene. Now I'm going to go ahead and export and select each of the meshes and hit the export button and call it final at the end. At each of these, so I know it's the final sculpted mesh. Oh, it looks like I was using high poly at the end, so I'm going to stick with that. Just type in high poly. So go ahead and go through and do that to each of the meshes and save them out. It'll take a few seconds to export. Once you have them all saved out, we'll begin bringing these back into Max, and we'll continue with the textures and lighting. So have that ready for the next part, and I'll finalize the scene so we have something looking like